Welcome back to Zarila HOA Stories. Drop your country or city name in comments. Chapter 1: The Gate That Sparked the War. Mike and Sarah had worked too hard to let it slip away now. Their new house was their dream come true, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where children played in front yards, and families waved at each other as they passed by. The kind of place where the houses were spaced just far enough apart that you could have a little piece of privacy. And for Mike and Sarah, privacy was everything. It was the reason they had installed the gate. The large, iron gate was more than just a boundary. It was a symbol of safety, of keeping their life just the way they liked it, free from prying eyes. They didn't mind the HOA rules, at least, not most of them. They understood that keeping the neighborhood neat and orderly was important. But this was personal. "I don't care what she says, Mike," Sarah muttered as she watched the black sedan pull up outside their house. "I'm not taking down the gate." Mike glanced at her, the same frustration in his eyes. He'd spent hours installing that gate, digging trenches, securing the posts, all to create some distance from the world. "She'll find a way to make us do it, Sarah. She always does." It was Karen, the HOA president. A woman who took pride in every detail of the neighborhood. She knew every inch of every house, every tree, every lawn. Nothing escaped her gaze, and she made sure everyone followed her version of perfection. Karen stepped out of the sedan, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She was tall, always impeccably dressed in her formal, somewhat outdated style. Today, she wore a white blouse tucked into a high-waisted skirt, her silver hair neatly pulled into a tight bun. Her presence alone was enough to make anyone feel like they had done something wrong, even when they hadn't. "Mike, Sarah," Karen greeted them in a voice that sounded more like a command than a greeting. "I see you've installed a new gate. You do know that violates HOA guidelines, don't you?" Her words were cold, without a hint of understanding. Mike stepped forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "It's not a violation, Karen. We just want some privacy." "Privacy?" Karen scoffed. "This isn't a gated community, Mike. You can't just put up a barrier like that because you feel like it. It disrupts the neighborhood's aesthetic. It's against the rules." Sarah's heart began to race, her palms sweating. She had dealt with Karen before, and she knew this wasn't going to be easy. "We're not hurting anyone. The gate is to keep our home secure. It's not like we're shutting out the entire neighborhood. You're not the only ones who live here," Karen replied, her tone dismissive. "And the HOA's rules exist for a reason. Aesthetics, safety, and uniformity are all part of it. You can't just do whatever you want." Mike was done trying to reason with her. He stepped closer to Karen, his voice firm but calm. "We're not removing it, Karen. If you want to fine us, fine. But we're not taking it down." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll have to report this to the board. You'll be hearing from me soon." As she turned to leave, she paused for a moment, looking over her shoulder at them. "You'll regret this," she said softly, just loud enough for them to hear, before getting back in her car and driving off. Mike stood there, staring at the back of her car as it disappeared down the street. His hands were shaking, his heart still racing. Sarah didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything at all. The anger in the pit of her stomach was enough. "Are we really going to let her get away with this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike exhaled deeply, rubbing his face with his hands. "I don't know, Sarah. She's the HOA president. She's got all the power in this neighborhood. And if we don't do what she says, she'll make our lives hell. I'm sick of her pushing us around," Sarah said, her voice harder now. "We've followed the rules, Mike. We've paid our dues. We don't deserve this." Mike looked at her, his mind racing. He had an idea, but it was risky. Very risky. He wasn't sure it would work, but it might be their only chance. "What if we set a trap?" he said quietly, his eyes glinting with something new, determination. "What if we let her think she's won, but we get her to slip up?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Mike leaned in, lowering his voice. I've been thinking about her. About how she always drives past our house, looking for something to report. What if we could catch her in the act? Show everyone she's the one breaking the rules. Sarah's eyes widened. She had never seen Mike this intense, this focused. You're saying, we bait her? Mike nodded, a smirk forming on his lips. Exactly. We know her patterns. We know she's going to keep coming by. All we need to do is catch her. And when we do, we'll have her. Sarah didn't say anything for a moment, the idea sinking in. It wasn't just a way to get back at Karen, it was a way to take control. But deep down, she knew this was going to get ugly. They were already in her crosshairs, and now they were about to make it personal. All right, Sarah said, her voice firm. Let's do it. But we have to be smart. We can't just charge in blind. Mike nodded, his mind already working through the details. We'll make her regret ever underestimating us. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their front yard, Sarah and Mike stood in front of their gate, their minds racing with the plan they were about to set into motion. They didn't know if it would work, but one thing was certain, they were going to make Karen wish she never crossed them. And they were going to do it on their terms. Chapter 2: The Breaking Point. The days after Karen's visit dragged on in an unsettling silence. Mike and Sarah spent their evenings in the living room, their eyes glancing every so often toward the front gate. It was the only thing they could focus on now. Their once peaceful sanctuary now felt like a target. Mike sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, looking at the HOA rules for the 100th time. They weren't breaking any of them. The gate was their property, their choice, and yet they were being punished for it. She's not going to let this go, is she? Sarah asked, her voice low as she leaned against the kitchen counter, her eyes fixed on the gate outside. Mike sighed, rubbing his temples. No. She won't. She's the HOA president, Sarah. She's got the whole neighborhood in her pocket. It was true. Karen had always been in control, using her position to enforce petty rules and create division. The longer Mike thought about it, the more frustrated he became. He couldn't stand the idea of just letting her win. But what could they do? Karen had the power, and they were the outsiders. That night, they attended the HOA meeting, dreading it but knowing they had no choice. As they arrived at the community center, Mike noticed Karen's car was already parked. She was there early, no surprise. The others began to trickle in, neighbors they hadn't seen much of since moving in. Most kept their heads down, exchanging polite but awkward hellos. There was a strange tension in the air, and Mike could feel it. The HOA wasn't just about rules, it was about Karen's control. The meeting began with the usual updates, discussions about the neighborhood's landscaping and upcoming community events. But Mike and Sarah couldn't focus. They knew Karen would bring up the gate sooner or later. As if on cue, Karen stood up, her presence commanding the room. I'd like to address a concern, she said, her voice smooth and authoritarian. There's been a violation of HOA guidelines. The gate on Mike and Sarah's property is not only an eyesore, but it's also in direct violation of our aesthetic rules. A murmur rippled through the room. Mike's heart skipped a beat. He could feel all eyes on them now. The quiet whispers of the neighbors, it felt like a courtroom. You all know how much I care about maintaining the look of our community, Karen continued, her eyes scanning the room, settling on Mike and Sarah. We've worked hard to make this neighborhood look cohesive. This gate is disruptive to that harmony. Mike clenched his jaw, but Sarah spoke first. Karen, we've been here for months, and we've never had an issue until now. Why are you suddenly making this a big deal? Karen's lips curled into a thin smile. It's always been an issue, Sarah. You just didn't notice. It's not just about the gate, it's about the principle of following the rules that keep this neighborhood beautiful. Beautiful? Sarah shot back. This isn't about beauty. This is about control. The room fell silent. Karen's gaze hardened, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to the other members of the HOA board. I'm requesting that we vote to fine them for the gate and for their defiance of the HOA's guidelines. A few heads nodded in agreement, but there were murmurs of hesitation from others in the room. Mike could see it in their eyes. Some were uncomfortable with this. They didn't want to be a part of this petty battle. But Karen's power was too great. We'll vote on it now, Karen said, cutting through the tension. The voting was swift. Most people voted in favor of the fine, and the decision was made. Mike and Sarah sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the outcome sinking in. The vote wasn't a victory for Karen, but she'd gotten what she wanted, a fine, a symbol of her power. The meeting ended shortly after, but as they stood up to leave, one of their neighbors, Jill, came over to them. Jill was a woman they had once been friendly with, someone who had even complimented Sarah on her garden just weeks ago. But now, her face was cold, her eyes avoiding theirs. Hey, Jill said hesitantly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I didn't vote for the fine. But Karen, she's got everyone's ear now. I don't think you're going to win this fight. Mike stared at her, trying to read her expression. Was she warning them? Or was she just another pawn in Karen's game? We know, Jill. But we're not backing down. Jill sighed, rubbing her forehead. You're making a mistake. She's been in charge of this neighborhood for years. And now, she's really got everyone on her side. As Jill walked away, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Jill was one of the few people who didn't seem completely under Karen's thumb, but her warning stuck with him. Could it be true? Was everyone really on Karen's side? That night, after the meeting, Mike and Sarah sat on their couch in the living room, the atmosphere heavy with disappointment. What now? Sarah asked, her voice strained with emotion. She's won. We've got a fine, and she's never going to let us forget it. Mike's mind was racing. She may have won this round, but it's not over. We need to take control of this, Sarah. We need to expose her. This isn't just about a gate, it's about everything she's done to this neighborhood. Sarah nodded, her resolve growing. What do we do? How do we fight back? Mike stood up, pacing back and forth. He had been thinking about this ever since the meeting ended. There was a way to turn this around, he was sure of it. We're not just going to take this. We're going to show everyone what she's been hiding. We're going to catch her in the act. Catch her? Sarah's eyes widened. What do you mean? Mike stopped pacing, a determined look in his eyes. I've been watching her. I've seen her drive by our place every day. She's always looking for something to report. What if we could turn the tables? What if we set up something she doesn't see coming? Sarah stared at him, a mix of disbelief and excitement in her eyes. You're saying we set a trap? Mike nodded. Exactly. We bait her. We catch her breaking the rules she's been enforcing on everyone else. And when we do, we bring it all out into the open. She'll have nowhere to hide. The idea settled into Sarah's mind, and she felt a spark of hope. For the first time since Karen had started this war, she felt like they were on the offense. But it was a dangerous game they were about to play. Chapter 3: The Trap is Set. Mike sat by the window, his eyes fixed on Karen's usual route. The same black sedan. The same timing. Every day, at exactly 3:30 p.m., she drove past their house, slow enough to scan their property, searching for any excuse to report them. It had become a routine, Karen's routine. And now, it was going to be his advantage. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, her mind elsewhere. She hadn't been able to focus lately, not with everything going on. Not with Karen looming over their every move. Do you think this will work? Sarah asked, her voice uncertain. She set down the knife, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Mike didn't turn to face her. It has to. The plan was simple. They'd set up hidden cameras along their property. Cameras that would catch Karen in the act. Mike had done his research. Karen didn't just watch their gate. She'd been caught on camera speeding through the neighborhood several times before. Mike just needed to get her on tape, breaking the same rules she'd been using to harass them. If they could expose her, they'd have the leverage to stop this madness once and for all. "I'll keep watch from here," Mike said, his voice low but determined. "You stay inside, in case she notices anything." Sarah nodded, her stomach tight. She didn't know if they were making the right move, but she was tired of being controlled by Karen. She had to believe Mike knew what he was doing. The minutes felt like hours. Mike sat in the living room, watching the street through the window. The sun was low now, casting long shadows over the front yard. His pulse quickened as he saw the black sedan appear, just like clockwork. It slowed as it neared their house, Karen's eyes scanning the property, looking for something. Mike grabbed his phone and silently texted Sarah, "She's here. Get ready." Sarah peered out from behind the kitchen curtains, her heart racing as Karen's car came into full view. The camera was hidden by the corner of the house, aimed directly at the gate. If everything went according to plan, Karen wouldn't even know what hit her. The car came to a stop just past the gate. Karen sat in the driver's seat, staring at the property as if she could see through the walls, her gaze intense and calculating. Mike held his breath, waiting. Then, as expected, Karen got out of her car and walked toward the gate. She made a show of inspecting it, her fingers running over the iron bars. Mike watched through the window, his grip tightening on the phone. He had the footage. He had the proof. Karen turned and walked back to her car, the whole thing captured on the camera. She didn't even notice the small reflective lens peeking out from behind the bushes. Mike exhaled sharply. That was it. He had what he needed. That night, Mike sat at the dining table, the video playing on his laptop. He had watched it over and over, each time his anger growing, but now there was something else. There was a sense of power. They weren't the victims anymore. Sarah sat across from him, watching the video in silence. Her fingers tapped nervously on the table. "What now?" Mike paused the video and looked at her. His face was serious. "We confront her." Sarah flinched. "You're sure?" "She'll deny it, Mike. She always does." "I know. But we're not just going to let her keep pushing us around. We're taking this to the HOA. The next day, Mike and Sarah arrived at the community center for the HOA meeting. As they entered, they could already feel the tension in the air. The room was filled with familiar faces, but no one met their eyes. They had become outcasts, and they knew it. Karen was already sitting at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the room. As soon as she saw Mike and Sarah, she straightened, a small, smug smile appearing on her face. "Ah, Mike, Sarah. Glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Mike didn't respond right away. He and Sarah took their seats, and Mike placed a small USB drive on the table in front of them. He could feel Karen's eyes on him, but he ignored her. "Before we begin," Mike said, his voice steady, "I think it's time we address something." The room went silent, the other members exchanging uneasy glances. Karen's smile faded, but she didn't speak. Mike clicked a button on the laptop in front of him, and the screen lit up with the footage from the previous day. He hit play. Everyone in the room watched, transfixed, as the video played. There was Karen, stepping out of her car, inspecting the gate. No one said a word as the footage continued, showing her walking up to the gate, inspecting it for several long moments, before turning back and getting into her car. When the video ended, Mike leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Karen. "Care to explain, Karen?" The room was dead silent. Karen's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, she said nothing. But then, in a low voice, she spoke. "This is not what you think," she began, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "That gate, it's not just about the rules. It's about security. We've had incidents in the past where—" "Cut the crap, Karen," Sarah interrupted, her voice louder than she'd intended. "We've all seen you speed through the neighborhood before. You're the one breaking the rules. Not us." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the words died in her throat. The tension in the room was palpable. The other HOA members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You've abused your power, Karen. Mike continued, his voice firm. You've been using the HOA to target us, and we have the proof now. Karen's expression twisted into a scowl. She was cornered. The once confident president now looked small, vulnerable. This isn't over, Mike. She spat, her voice shaking. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're messing with. As Karen stood up, ready to leave, Mike could feel the atmosphere shift. The room was divided now. Some people were clearly uncomfortable, but others were looking at him with new respect. But as Karen walked out, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. There was more to this than just a simple fight over a gate. Chapter 4: The Confrontation. Mike and Sarah left the HOA meeting in a heavy silence, the words of Karen still echoing in their minds. She had been cornered. Exposed. But her final words haunted them. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're messing with. As they walked to their car, Mike's fingers tightened around his keys. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to shout and demand that everything end right there. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. It wasn't over until they could break Karen's grip on the neighborhood. Do you think she'll just let this go? Sarah asked quietly, her eyes scanning the street. Mike shook his head. No. She's too proud. She'll come back, and when she does, we need to be ready. The next few days passed in a blur. The aftermath of the meeting hung over Mike and Sarah like a storm cloud. They kept waiting for Karen to retaliate, but nothing happened. No calls, no fines, no threats. It was eerie. Almost too quiet. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was plotting something, but Mike remained calm. She's trying to figure out her next move, he said. We've rattled her. She's not going to make a mistake again. But as each day passed without a word from Karen, Sarah's unease grew. Something didn't feel right. They had exposed her, but she was still the HOA president. She still had power. Mike had his own fears, but he didn't want to voice them. Instead, he focused on their next step. They had won this small battle, but the war was far from over. Karen was too dangerous to underestimate. 2 days later, at the same time in the afternoon, Mike spotted the familiar black sedan pulling up to the curb. This time, Karen didn't slow down. She didn't even stop. She drove past their house, her gaze fixed straight ahead, but Mike could feel her eyes burning through the car window. He watched her car until it disappeared from view, then turned to Sarah. She's up to something. I don't know what, but she's not backing down. Maybe she's just giving us a taste of our own medicine, Sarah said, but her voice wavered. Mike gritted his teeth. No. She's plotting something bigger. I can feel it. That evening, the knock on the door came at exactly 7:30 p.m. Mike opened the door to find a uniformed officer standing on the front step, his expression unreadable. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson? The officer asked. We've received a report of a code violation from the HOA. You're being fined for having an unauthorized structure on your property. The blood drained from Mike's face. He glanced over at Sarah, whose eyes were wide with shock. Unauthorized structure? What are you talking about? Mike asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. We're not violating anything. The officer handed Mike a piece of paper with the HOA's official letterhead. According to the report, your gate does not comply with the approved property layout. The HOA has filed a formal complaint, and we're required to issue a fine. Mike stared at the paper, his mind racing. The gate. It was always about the gate. He knew it. How much is the fine? Sarah asked, her voice a mix of anger and fear. The officer didn't answer immediately. He checked his clipboard and then met Mike's eyes. $2,000. Payment is due within 7 days. Mike couldn't believe it. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising. We've already dealt with this. This is harassment. The officer shrugged, as though it was just another job. I'm just the messenger. You need to take it up with the HOA. As the officer turned to leave, Mike slammed the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest. $2,000. It wasn't just a fine, it was Karen's way of showing she wasn't finished. I knew it, Sarah whispered, her hand shaking as she reached for Mike's. She won't stop until she's destroyed us. Mike clenched his jaw, his mind running through every possible way to fight back. But as the evening dragged on, his thoughts began to circle back to one thing. Karen was using the HOA to bully them. She was using her power to push them to the edge. The next morning, Mike and Sarah met with a lawyer. It was the first step in trying to fight back. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Linda, listened carefully to everything they said. I've dealt with HOA disputes before, she said, her voice professional and calm. But I need to warn you. This is going to be a long fight. Karen isn't just going to back down, and she's got the whole HOA behind her. Mike and Sarah exchanged a glance. They already knew that. But what could they do? They had no choice but to fight. Linda leaned back in her chair. The first thing we can do is challenge the fine. If we can prove it's been issued unfairly, we can get it reduced or even dismissed. But you need to gather evidence. Document everything. Get any proof you can that shows Karen is using her position to target you. Mike nodded, his resolve hardening. We'll do whatever it takes. But I'm not letting her win. That evening, Mike was alone in the living room when the text came. It was from an unknown number. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. You'll regret crossing me. Mike stared at the screen, his heart dropping into his stomach. He knew that message. He knew exactly who it was from. It was Karen. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. Mike didn't hesitate. He picked up, his hand trembling slightly. Hello? He answered. A familiar voice, cold and venomous, came through the line. I gave you a chance, Mike. But now you've forced my hand. It was Karen. Her voice sent a chill through his body. This is far from over. And you're about to lose everything. Mike's blood ran cold. He had known Karen wouldn't go quietly. But this felt different. Chapter 5: The Shocking Twist. Mike couldn't sleep. His mind raced, replaying the phone call with Karen, the cruel text messages, and now the fine. $2,000. For something they hadn't even done wrong. The weight of it all pressed down on him like a heavy stone, suffocating him with the thought that maybe they were trapped. He stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street. His fingers gripped the edges of the windowsill, his mind searching for a way out, for any sign that they could beat her. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about the gate anymore. Karen wasn't just punishing them for a minor violation. This was personal. Sarah walked into the room, her footsteps soft but purposeful. She stood beside him, looking out at the same street, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Mike, she said quietly, her voice shaking just slightly. What are we going to do? He didn't answer immediately. He was trying to think, to come up with a plan. But nothing seemed to work. I don't know, he muttered. I feel like she's always 2 steps ahead of us. Sarah sighed and then took a deep breath. We have to fight back. We can't just give in to her. We have to do what we can. Mike turned to her, meeting her gaze. I know. But I don't know how much more of this I can take. The tension between them hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But Sarah's expression softened as she took his hand. We're in this together. We'll figure it out. The next day, Mike and Sarah sat at their kitchen table with Linda, their lawyer. They had gone over the fine, the illegal nature of the HOA's tactics, and the best ways to fight it. But Mike could see the concern in Linda's eyes. This wasn't a simple case. It was a battle for their home, their dignity, and their future. There's one option we have left, Linda said, her voice steady but tense. We can file a formal complaint with the city about the HOA's actions. If we can prove they're abusing their power, it might force them to back down. But you'll need more evidence. Evidence? Mike asked, frustration rising in his chest. What do you mean? We have proof that Karen's been targeting us. The fine, the phone calls, the threats. Linda shook her head. That's not enough. You need to prove the HOA is consistently using its power to harm homeowners. You need to show that this isn't an isolated incident. Mike felt his stomach tighten. They couldn't let Karen win, but what more could they do? What was the next step in this dangerous game? Later that afternoon, as Mike and Sarah gathered their things to leave the house for a walk, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face turning pale. What is it? Mike asked, his voice tense. It's from Jill, Sarah said, her voice shaky. She wants to meet. She says she has something important to tell us. Mike felt a flash of anger. Jill. Their neighbor. The same woman who had once sided with Karen. The same woman who had warned them that they were making a mistake by fighting back. Why was she reaching out now? What does she want? Mike asked, his tone cold. I don't know, Sarah replied, her voice uncertain. But I'm going to meet her. She says it's urgent. Half an hour later, they stood in front of Jill's house, waiting for her to answer the door. Jill opened it slowly, her face pale, her eyes darting around nervously. Come in, she said quickly, glancing over her shoulder as though she were making sure no one was watching. Once inside, Jill closed the door behind them, her hands shaking. I know this looks strange, she said, her voice low. But I need to tell you something. Mike crossed his arms, suspicion rising. What is it, Jill? Jill took a deep breath and then looked at Sarah. I'm sorry for what I said at the meeting. I didn't know what was really going on. But now I do. And I need to help you. Mike raised an eyebrow. Help us? After everything? Why should we trust you? Jill's eyes filled with regret. Because Karen isn't just targeting you. She's been doing this to everyone. For years. I've seen the files. I've seen the complaints she's buried, the fines she's issued for things that don't even make sense. I didn't know at first, but now I do. And I can't stay silent anymore. Sarah took a step forward, her voice trembling. What do you mean? What files? Jill glanced nervously toward the window before speaking again. Karen has been manipulating the HOA's rules for her own benefit. She's been putting pressure on homeowners, forcing them to pay fines, and in some cases, she's been keeping people's properties locked up in legal battles. I have copies of the paperwork, proof of everything she's done. If you can get it into the right hands, you can bring her down. Mike's heart raced. Could it be true? Could Karen really be this corrupt? He felt a surge of hope, but also fear. This was bigger than just them now. This was about exposing Karen's grip on the entire neighborhood. What do you want in return? Mike asked, his voice harsh. Jill shook her head. I just want to make things right. I can't let her keep ruining people's lives. That night, Mike and Sarah sat in their living room, staring at the stack of papers Jill had given them. Copies of complaints, financial records, and emails, everything Karen had buried to keep her hold on the HOA. It was all there, the proof they needed. Mike's fingers traced the edge of the paperwork, his mind racing with the possibilities. They had what they needed. They had the ammunition to take Karen down. But something gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that Jill wasn't telling them everything. There was something in her eyes, a look of fear. A look that said she knew more than she was letting on. Mike stood up, his gaze still fixed on the papers. This is it. This is our chance. Sarah nodded, but her face was pale. Mike, what if Karen finds out? What if she's already watching us? The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. They had a choice to make. They could either take the fight to the next level or back down and let Karen continue to control their lives. If you liked my video, then make sure to like and subscribe my channel.